The British Empire. How it took over the world. Part 2 of our series about powerful countries throughout history. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Part 1, the Mongol Empire. When people talk about empires that dominated the world stage, most people think of two names, Rome or the Mongols. But there is one more empire that is just as deserving of the title as these other two. And when we consider the amount of time that this empire spent at the top of the game, it could even make the case for being the most powerful in history. The British Empire would eventually come to include territories across the entirety of the globe. At its peak in the 19th century, it spanned from the continent of Europe to the farthest reaches of Oceania. In fact, the British Empire was so extensive that it earned the nickname the Empire on which the sun never sets. This is because there was always at least one British territory that was in daylight, no matter what time of the day it was. But how did Britain manage to build such an impressive empire? Let's find out in today's video. It's the British Empire. How it took over the world. As we discussed in our previous video, England in the early 16th century was still very much a second-rate power in Europe. However, thanks to the introduction of representative democracy, the English were able to go through a period of relative peace and stability. Compared to the rest of Europe during the 17th century, this allowed England to start focusing on things outside of their borders for the first time in quite a while. At this time, the English monarchy had been restored after a decade of civil war and rule by Oliver Cromwell. The country was still recovering from the devastation of the conflict, but King James I saw an opportunity to restore the wealth and prestige of the kingdom by focusing on overseas expansion. In 1607, James I granted the Virginia Company a charter to establish an English colony in North America. This settlement, which would become known as Jamestown, was the first of many and marked the beginning of England's colonial aspirations. It was not long before the riches of the New World became apparent, and many European powers began scrambling to claim land in the Americas. But England was not in a position to compete with Spain and Portugal, although those two nations had been exploring and claiming land in the Americas since the 15th century. England only had a handful of colonies and a relatively small population. To compete with Spain and Portugal, England needed to find a way to project power across the Atlantic Ocean. In 1620, the English settled the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which would later develop into the city of Boston. This was followed by a number of other settlements along the Atlantic coast, including the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations in 1636. The English colonies grew rapidly in the following decades. Thanks to a combination of high birth rates and immigration from England, by the end of the 17th century, the colonies had a population of over 250,000 people. However, the rapid growth of the colonies led to tensions with the Native Americans, who had lived on the land for thousands of years. As the English colonies expanded westward, they came into conflict with the Iroquois Confederacy, the Five Nations. The Iroquois were a powerful alliance of 5 Native American tribes who had united to resist the encroachment of European settlers on their lands. The English colonies, backed by the power of the English monarchy, were able to defeat the Iroquois and force them to cede a large portion of their land. Meanwhile, the French were also competing with the English for control of North America. The French had established several colonies in Canada and the Great Lakes region, and they had good relations with the Iroquois Confederacy. The French and Indian War, as it was called, lasted from 1754 to 1763 and resulted in the defeat of the French and the expansion of the English colonies. However, the war was costly, and the English government began to impose new taxes on the colonies to help pay for it. This led to growing resentment among the colonists, who felt that they were being exploited by the English government. The situation was made worse by the fact that the colonists had no representation in the English Parliament. They were being taxed without having a voice in the matter. This tension between the colonies and the mother country would come to a head in 1776 when the colonies declared independence and the United States was born. During this time, the British Empire was experiencing something of a renaissance. Queen Elizabeth I had brought stability to the throne, and the nation was enjoying a golden age of exploration and colonization. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 had established England's naval supremacy, and the empire was expanding rapidly. The reign of Elizabeth I is considered to be a high point in the history of the British Empire. Under her leadership, England became a major player in world affairs, and the seeds of the empire were sown. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 established England's naval supremacy and set the stage for the empire's future expansion. However, the empire was not without its problems. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 had left England in a precarious position. Spain was still a major power, and the English were vulnerable to attack. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 established England's naval supremacy and set the stage for the empire's future expansion. Spain was still a major power, and the English were vulnerable to attack. Despite these challenges, the empire continued to grow. In 1607, the first English colony was established in North America in the British East India Company was formed in 1600. This company would go on to become the largest corporation in the world and play a major role in the empire's growth. The empire reached its peak in the 19th century, when it included territories across the entirety of the globe. From the continent of Europe to the farthest reaches of Oceania, the British Empire was truly a global empire. However, the empire was not without its critics. Many people believe that the British Empire was built on exploitation and oppression. They argue that the empire's wealth was built on the backs of slaves, and that the empire's military was used to suppress rebellions and maintain control over the colonies. The British Empire is a complex and controversial topic. There is no doubt that the empire accomplished great things and brought stability and prosperity to many parts of the world. But it is also true that the empire was built on exploitation and oppression. It is up to each individual to decide how they feel about the British Empire. But one thing is for sure, it was one of the most powerful empires in history. Let us know in the comments below if you think the British Empire was good or bad for the world. While the British Empire was spreading across the globe, another empire was rising in the East. The British Empire didn't just redraw maps, it rewrote global history. But with power came consequences that still echo today. If this exploration gave you a deeper understanding of empire and impact, leave a like. And comment below with which region of the empire you'd like to learn more about. The Chinese were building an empire unlike any the world had ever seen. Click here to learn about the rise of the Chinese Empire. And for more historical deep dives that reveal how nations rose and fell, subscribe to HistoroMystic and turn on notifications. The past is never truly past. Or click here to watch another one of our videos. Thanks for watching.